The secrets of the small shafts of the Great Pyramid. 4. Underbar whereabouts of the Dixon Relics Part 2. In continuation of the previous video, this was a very important piece of evidence for determining the age of the Pyramid of Cheops, because the pieces of wood inside could now be examined using the radiocarbon dating method. The results of the investigation were only published in December 2020. The age of the cedar wood pieces was estimated at 3,341 to 3094 BC. And thus in the 4th millennium BC. Well before the assumed construction time of the Great Pyramid in the 26th century BC. The difference was at least 500 years. The cedar wood most likely came from what is now Lebanon, as there were already inscriptions in the Old Kingdom describing the transport of cedar wood from there. In ancient times, this wood was used to build palaces and temples. It was also a sought-after wood for shipbuilding and furniture production. However, the tree from which the wood comes cannot have been felled until the beginning of the 26th century, as the decay process of C14 only begins with the death of the tree. Therefore it could at most have come from a long dead branch of the tree. Nevertheless, a dead branch on a tree is unlikely to last for several centuries, so this variant is unlikely to be an explanation. It is therefore more likely that the wood had already been reused several times before it ended up in the shaft of the Great Pyramid, as cedar wood was very valuable in Egypt. Unfortunately, age dating alone doesn't prove anything, except that the pyramid was not built 10,000 years ago or even longer, as many mystics believe. Sahi Hawass wrote in the 2004 book, The Treasures of the Pyramids. Some experts have suggested determining the age of the wooden strip using the C14 method. They assume that this piece must have been left in the shaft during pyramid construction, assuming the shaft was sealed. This is not necessarily the case in my opinion. The wood could just as easily have been thrown into the shaft through the shaft exit if one exists after construction. Jan ten Brink also found a piece of wood with 2 holes. This may be the handle into which the bronze hook discovered by Dixon was once inserted. It is very surprising that Hawass assumes the possibility that the piece of wood could have ended up in the shaft after the pyramid was built. He knew that this shaft was only opened in 1872 by Wayman Dixon, and that in 2002 the blocking stone was found in the northern Queen's Chamber shaft, and that no other shaft openings were found in the shaft itself by the exploration robot, through which the piece of wood could have fallen at a later date. The reference to the possible use of the hook found in the shaft could also be an explanation for the other 5 separate pieces of wood in Dixon's small cigarette box. In connection with the small shafts in the Queen's Chamber, Hawass makes the following statement in the book mentioned above on the same page as the quote mentioned above. In the south shaft upyout came to a stop after 63.4 meters, on some kind of door or plate, 2 copper handles that blocked the entire shaft. At some point in ancient times, a piece of the left handle fell off, and was about 2 meters in front of the obstacle. There is also an error in this statement, as a piece of the left handle or metal pin was not broken off in ancient times, but only in the 20th century as part of Morton Edgar's exploration with his long, screw-together iron rods with a wooden ball top end. Edgar also describes how, during his shaft inspection, he repeatedly encountered a hard obstacle with the wooden ball that blocked the path. This was, of course, the blocking stone at the end of the shaft, and in the process, it damaged the left metal pin. Interestingly, the wood fragments that have now resurfaced in the pyramid were not the only wood that has been examined so far in connection with the Great Pyramid. Hahowever, there have been further studies of pieces of charcoal used in the mortar used in the Pyramid of Cheops. In 1984, Lena, Hawass and others performed radiocarbon dating on material from Old Kingdom Egyptian monuments. In 1984, they took 80 samples from 10 pyramids, including those of Khufu, Chephren and Menkaure at Giza, as well as 6 mortuary temples, all believed to be from the Old Kingdom Ka. 2686 to 2181 BCE. Samples of mortar residue from the top layers of stone were used in the Pyramid of Cheops. A sample was also taken from a tomb from the First Dynasty approx. 3100 BC. They obtained 73 radiocarbon dates, mostly from fragments of charred wood. Other samples ranged from wooden beams protruding from the core of Djoser's step pyramid to unburned straw from mud brick walls associated with some of the pyramid complexes. They dated the larger samples in the radiocarbon laboratory at Southern Methodist University and the smaller ones at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. They had calibrated this data using the latest methods. All samples were chemically treated to remove unwanted carbonates. The two labs compared their accuracy by dating several previously shared samples. They then compared their results with the mean dates of the kings to which the monuments belonged. Cambridge Ancient History, 3rd ed. The radiocarbon date C14 provided a value that was on average 374 years older than expected. However, when dealing with the 374-year discrepancy, they also had to consider the possibility that the wood used could be old wood and not wood from recently cut trees. In 1984, they considered it unlikely that the pyramid builders consistently used centuries-old Egyptian wood as fuel when making mortar. The 1984 results left them with too little data to conclude that the historical chronology of the Old Kingdom was off by almost 400 years, but they considered it at least a possibility. Alternatively, if their radiocarbon age estimates were flawed for some reason, they had to assume that many other dates obtained from Egyptian material were also suspect. This prompted them to conduct a second, larger study. In 1994–1995 they received support from the David H. Koch Foundation for another round of radiocarbon dating. This time more than 300 samples were collected. They took samples from monuments from First Dynasty tombs at Saqqara, the Djoser Pyramid, the Giza Pyramids, and a selection of 5th and 6th Dynasty and Middle Kingdom pyramids. Samples were also taken during excavations on the Giza Plateau, where two largely intact bakeries were discovered in 1991. An abundance of wood from acacia trees was found in the mortar, but this was not surprising since the acacia is one of the few trees common in Egypt. The acacia burns slowly and at high temperatures, making it an ideal fuel for making mortar or other tasks that require high, consistent heat.